It's May 29th, 1996. My name is Amy Tarr. The interviewer's name is Siegfried Turner. We're in Newton Center, Massachusetts, in the United States.
This is tape one.
Tape 1.
I'm rolling.
My name is Amy Tarr, A-M-Y-T-A-R-R. It's May 29th, 1996, and I'm in Newton Center, Massachusetts, and I'm interviewing Siegfried Turner.
Do you want to spell your name and his name?
I spelled mine.
I'm sorry, his name?
Are we still rolling? Or?
Yep.
Can we go over it? My name is Amy Tarr, A-M-Y-T-A-R-R, and I'm interviewing Siegfried Turner in Newton Center, Massachusetts, in the United States, and the date is May 29th, 1996.
Okay, I'm rolling.
Mr. Turner, can you tell me your full name and spell it for me?
My full name is Siegfried Michael Michael Turner. It's S-I-E-G-F-R-I-E-D, Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Turner, T-U-R-N-E-R.
Is that the name that you were born with?
Exactly, except it was pronounced differently.
How was it pronounced?
Siegfried Michael Turner.
And what name do you go by now?
S. Michael Turner.
Do you have a nickname?
Mike. In Germany it was Ziggy.
Okay. And what date were you born?
I was born October 10th, 1924.
And where were you born?
Hamburg, Germany.
And how old are you now?
I am 71 years old.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about your early life in Hamburg. Where did you live? What was the address?
We lived at I was born at number 9 Brackdamm, B-R-A-C-K-D-A-M-M, in Hamburg. It is in the district of Hammerburg. We lived there in back of a store that my father owned at number 9. And I would say I was around 7 or 8 years old when we moved to 131 Süderstraße. It's S-U umlaut D-E-R-S-T-R-A-S-Z-E.
Okay. And what do you remember about either of those homes that you lived in?
My earliest memory of number 9 Brackdamm was that it was on a Sunday morning, and my governess or maid or whatever was dressing me. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. And what I also remember was that the meals that we had there every breakfast and every night, and especially on Friday nights when it was Shabbat and my father would make kiddush. And one time the maid that we had gave him whiskey instead of wine, and he really almost gagged on it and was very angry. But it was a generally happy time to come to be there in terms of being able to play on the street with the other children, none of whom were Jewish, by the way. This was a non-Jewish area. And buying ice cream at the dairy store and stuff like that, playing games out on the street. There was also a good deal of anti-Semitism even before Hitler came. And being the only Jewish family on the street, we were often taunted by the other kids, called us cheap Jews, or the equivalent. It got worse as we got into the 30s. But by then, I didn't live there anymore. We lived at Süderstraße, and we didn't really know our neighbors there because it was a big apartment building.
I want to get back to your neighborhood. It was, where in Hamburg, what kind of a place was it? Was it...
It was in the Hammerburg section, which is near the port. And so, consequently, a lot of the people living there were blue-collar workers working in the docks, and there were no really professional, it was not a professional neighborhood. There was a school across the street. I remember it being somewhat of a pinkish neighborhood in terms of politics, because there was a lot of stuff about, I remember going over to the school and there was a club that had some kind of an affair, and they'd be singing about Russian samovars and somebody pouring tea, and but of course that all changed overnight the moment Hitler got in. I remember even seeing a red flag flying out in front of the school one time. Then later on it was a swastika. But I think there was a very pinkish neighborhood, as I would say, liberal.
Can you tell us about your family, your mother, your father, their names, what they were like?
Mm-hmm. My mother name was Rachel, or Ruchel, as she was called. She was born in Oświęcim, Poland, which was Austria at the time. That later became known as Auschwitz. She was one of a fairly large family. She had 3 brothers, all of whom emigrated to the United States in the 20s, and a sister who stayed there, Rosa, and her husband, and then, of course, all her children. I don't know where she fit in, but her father owned a bakery. He was called Yankel the Bagel Baker.
In Auschwitz?
In Auschwitz, yeah, in Auschwitz, yeah. And her mother, the story was that she went blind after one of her other children got killed in the First World War. I think there is a history of glaucoma in my mother's family, so that might have been what happened. I remember her because my mother would take us on visits to see her family in Poland. I remember her being blind and feeling my face to see what I looked like.
What was your grandmother's name? Do you remember?
I really don't. I know my grandfather was Jacob. I know I have my mother's birth certificate, and it's on there, but I can't remember it. My mother was born in October 4th, 1896.
What was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Schoen, S-C-H-O-E-N, also spelled sometimes S-C-H-E-I-N. And that's also kind of an interesting story because her father changed his name from Zagorski. Zagorski was the original name, but he didn't think that that was Austrian enough, so he changed it to Shane. And so I have some relatives called Zagorski, and they're living in New York, a couple of my mother's cousin's children.
And this bagel bakery in Auschwitz, where was it? Was it in the center of town? Do you know?
By the time I got to see him, he was pretty old. I don't even know if he had the bakery anymore. But it was a very small village. It was not a town as I recall it.
What do you remember about it?
I remember more about it from 1935, from my visit there in 1935. Although I'd been there a couple of times before, but in 35 it was already cold in winter, in November and December. And I remember being taunted by the kids there, and they would yell at us something in Polish, which I couldn't understand, except the first word, which was dzieje, which is Jew. And it was always like something like, they translated it for me, it says, Jew go to Palestine, which seems ironic since that's where we were headed, but no reason, no cause for that. I mean, we didn't do anything. In fact, I was brought up in Hamburg to always keep a low profile, so to speak, and not call attention to myself in any way. It was actually, I would say it was a shtetl, the way it's described now, with a mixed population.
Okay, let's come back and talk about your mother, as you knew her in Hamburg when you were a little boy. What can you tell us about your mother?
I can tell you something else about my mother. Before she came to Hamburg, she used to tell me that during the war, the First World War, she used to smuggle bread into Vienna, hiding it inside of her coat because there was such a famine in Vienna. And, just to give you an idea, she was always sort of a risk taker in a way, in that sense. Everybody did, I guess, survival. What I remember about her was that she was a worker. The story was that within 1 week after my birth, I was born at home, and I had what do you call it, a Hilfsame, a midwife deliver me. And within a week after my birth, she was back in the store working beside my father, and that was considered, really radical in those days. Nowadays, it doesn't matter, but in those days, you stayed home, and she would come and nurse me in between shifts in the store. And we had a big dog, a German Shepherd named Lady, who I don't remember, but she used to curl up in front of my mother and become sort of a footstool for my mother while she would nurse me. But she spent morning to night in the store with my father, even though they had several other employees in the store. It was a grocery store. Oh, of a certain kind, eggs, butter, and cheese, really. And
What else did she do with her time? What constitutes?
she didn't have any really social activities. Weekends, there was only one day for the weekend, that was Sunday, because she worked Saturdays too. She would bake, she would cook. At nights, she and my father would go out times to different affairs for the club that they belonged to, but she was never considered herself a social butterfly or anything like that.
Okay.
She was always working.
And what about your father? What was his name and what was he like?
My father was born Isaac. Julius came on in 1928. Turner. He was an orphan. He was orphaned when he was about 5 years old. That's when his father died. And for all intents and purposes, even though his mother didn't die until 1926, I think, he was considered an orphan and was sort of brought up by various relatives at different times.
Where was he born?
He was born in Dynów, Dynow, Poland, which is also in Galicia. Not too far from Krakow, I would think. I've never been there. But apparently that was quite a center of Jewish learning. Several famous rabbis came from that. His name was Turner, even though there were other members of his family whose name was Fish. And the reason for that was apparently that was his mother's maiden name, Turner. And the story he used to tell me, I don't know how accurate this is, but he used to tell me that when they drafted him into the Austrian army during the First World War, they did not recognize the rabbinic marriage of his parents, and so they gave him his mother's name as though he were illegitimate. And I've heard other versions of the story, but this is the one that he tells me, and I choose to believe that. He has another brother. He had another brother who was a Michael Turner, who lived in Krakow and owned a shoe factory and shoe stores. And so he's not the only one. So I have other relatives named Turner.
How old was your father when he came to Germany?
It must have been right after the First World War. So he would have been. He was born 1891. So I would say he was about 20. I can't add too well. He was in his late 20s, I would say, maybe early 30s. The story he told me at that time was that, and this other people have verified this that I've known. He started off by going into the country on his bicycle, buying basket of eggs. Now you have to understand this was during inflation in Germany in the late early 1920s, 1920, when an egg would cost 3 trillion marks, a basket full of paper money. That's the inflation. And so he would pedal home with a basket of eggs to sell them in Hamburg. Eventually opened a store. He must have had the store before He also worked, I think, on the docks, because he used to tell me about all the Russian immigrants coming through Hamburg. And he used to say, my God, you used to see them with their little bags of belongings on their back coming through the port of Hamburg.
So your father built a business on his own pretty much? No?
All on his own, yeah.
And again, what was the store like?
The store was what they called fine cost and finer foods. It was not really a delicatessen, although it had some delicatessen items. It had smoked Westphalian ham and bacon and lard, great big globs of lard wrapped in like a cellophane plastic or something. Some canned goods, imported canned goods. Those were called Kolonialwaren because they came from the colonies, you see. Libby's pineapple, stuff like that. But mostly eggs, butter, and cheese. And that was really the thing that he was known for, was the assortment of cheeses. He would import them directly from Holland and Denmark. And certainly get them from farms right in Germany, too. And hams and bacons. And at Christmas they'd have geese hanging from the rafters.
And what kind of people patronized the store?
The average people on the streets. He had a steady stream of customers from all around because he was known for giving an honest scale, always giving a little bit extra. And he had a marvelous personality as far as, retail selling. He was good to people.
So obviously this wasn't a kosher store.
No. We imported all our meats from the kosher butcher, and from a kosher. There were several in Hamburg. And matzahs. And we had a kosher kitchen at home. We had separate sinks for washing meat and dairy. Nobody had refrigerators. I mean, everybody bought daily, and we did have an icebox, I think. But
so did you live
it was confusing because sometimes he'd slip me a piece of ham in the store, something good, a delicacy.
Okay, and about your father again, what else can you tell us about him? Was he a political person? Did he belong to organizations?
He knew everybody, it seemed like. I mean, everybody said he was not an educated person in the usual sense that he went to school. He went to Cheder, a religious school, from like everybody else did, but he was very worldly wise, and he was very comfortable in political circles, and I think he knew people in the city government, certainly knew all the policemen on the beat quite well, and cultivated them.
Did they come to the store?
Oh, yes. Always.
Did you know
Sometimes he'd sneak them in the back and offer them a glass of whiskey or something. Brandy, usually. Cognac. I didn't get your last question.
Did you know any of these policemen? Did you see them?
Just by sight. I wouldn't.
Okay.
They were certainly very friendly. There was no animosity of any kind.
Okay. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one sister, Henny. She was born Henny, Henny, and she's named after my father's grandmother, I believe. She was a year less 13 days older than I am. She was born on October 23rd, 1920. October 23rd, 1923. And that was the day in which there was it was not an uprising, but it was a terrible political disturbance with all kinds of shootings going on. She was born in a Jewish hospital, and my father described riding on his bicycle to see my mother and the baby and dodging bullets all along the way. And it's true. I've looked that up. October 23rd, 1923 was a very bad day in Hamburg. There was a communist, fascist, democratic insurrection of some sort.
Okay. What was your sister like? Did you play together?
Oh, we were very close, being so close in age. And we played a lot together, yeah. And after a while, though, we got to a different age, and we shared a bedroom along with our maid. We had, very big bedroom, but we had separate beds, certainly, which didn't, was quite common in those days. But the reason we had a maid is that because my mother was never there, she needed someone to take care of the kids.
And who was your maid?
The first maid that I know of was somebody called Emmy Glick, and she was Jewish, and my parents loved her. That's when I was a baby, so she was a good nursemaid, apparently. After that, I don't remember until Ernie came in our lives. Ernie was a German girl. She came from the farm. She was quite well educated and a marvelous person. She was really, she was strict with us, but she also was very loving, and she'd take us places. In fact, we even went to visit her family. She took us on, when she had to leave a vacation, she took us with her over Christmas to stay with her family who had a dairy farm in the country. And I remember going on the sleigh with delivering milk, and the horse knew where to stop, that kind of thing. It was a very loving relationship.
And did you have any contact with your Polish relatives?
Only on vacations. Only on vacations. The couple of times I did not go with my mother when she went to visit, and I've seen the pictures my sister had taken in Poland with cousins in Krakow. But I remember mostly Auschwitz, and to tell you frankly, it was quite a shock for me because it was so different from what I was used to in Hamburg. The cleanliness was different. The paved streets, they didn't have paved streets and stuff like that. So I was a little bit upset by that at the time. It was such a difference.
Mr. Turner, if you would tell me about yourself as a little boy, what were you like?
I was shy. I didn't assert myself very much. I was also sickly. I was always having colds, and then by the time I was 7, I developed a rheumatic kind of illness. They thought it was rheumatic fever, but it was more like a polyarthritis. I had all my joints at one point or another. That lasted. It was very severe and troubled me. So I was very interested in music, always, and in reading. They used to laugh at me because somebody would wash the floor, and then they'd spread newspapers over it, and I'd be lying on top of the newspapers reading the paper, and they used to have to shoo me up because I couldn't walk across the floor. And books, I had lots of books, and I had lots of records. I collected records, listened to the radio a lot. So I was sort of a withdrawn kid in a way.
Did you go to the theater?
Yes, I loved it. My father took us, my father took us some Sundays after he got through cleaning up the store from the week, He'd take us to the Hansa Theater, which was a variety theater, vaudeville really, but very, very high class. And then he'd take us to the Automat, which is an automat restaurant. You put money in and you see things coming around and dropping in plate and so forth. And he took us through the Elbe Tunnel, the tunnel that went underneath the Elbe, which was all decorated with tiles of fish and everything. It's still there. And on Sundays we would go to, theater. You asked me about theater. He had tickets to the opera because he had window cards, from the opera showing the performances scheduled. So in return they'd give him some free tickets. Not the big Staatsoper, that's the state opera, but this is the Volksoper. We saw operettas. I saw the Gypsy Baron, and I saw Rigoletto, and things like that. And sometimes at night. And I took violin lessons, so that I appreciated music a great deal.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit about your Jewish life as a boy? How would you characterize the Jewishness of your family?
My father and mother were both Orthodox in their religious observance, except for what the business was different. But aside from that, and they sent my sister and myself to Jewish schools, in contrast to a lot of other people who sent their kids to public schools. And the schools we both went to were Orthodox rather than Reform or conservative. I don't know if they had conservatives, but they certainly did have Reform synagogues in Hamburg. In fact, I was amazed at the number of synagogues there. I was just looking at a list. There seemed like at least 50 or 60 synagogues in a city that the population of 30,000 Jews. We belonged to one that was mostly comprised of East European Jews background, and it was in a house, in a private house on the second floor that had been converted into a synagogue, a separate room for women with a divider, a screen grill, I remember, and the men. And the school that I went to was very, very Orthodox. We had Hebrew from the first grade and observed all the holidays, had special programs for the holidays. At the same time, it was very secular, too, in terms of identifying with German culture and geography and all that.
Okay. We'll stop now. Before we start again, I want you to just mention. Okay. What was the name of the school and the address of the school, if you remember?
The name of the school was Talmud Torah Realschule. Want me to spell that?
Sure.
Talmud Torah Realschule. That last part is the equivalent. The Realschule is the equivalent of in some countries called gymnasium or gymnasium, which means higher school, leading to a college preparatory school kind of thing. The school was located Grindelhof, Grindelhof, which is in the Rotenbaum section, I think, of Hamburg. It's in the Jewish section of Hamburg, anyhow. Right next door was the big synagogue. The school was founded in 1805, I believe. And it's a school for boys. They're quite large. I couldn't tell you how many students there were at any given time, but it seemed like an awful lot. And the building is fairly large, 4 stories. The subjects included Hebrew reading and writing from the first grade, mostly around biblical texts, because I still have somewhere a copy of Genesis in Hebrew from that school, my doodles in it.
What would a typical day be like, if you can remember, approximately?
Well, we had some interesting days there. I'll tell you my first school day. My teacher's name was Hertz, which is heart, H-E-R-T, like the car rental place. And he said, "My name is Herr Hertz," and he drew a big heart on the blackboard. From that moment on, I liked him. He was a very nice man. We all had male teachers, no female teachers. A typical day, then later on I had some very strict ones. I had one teacher who served in the First World War, and he thought it never had ended. So first thing he did was had us stand up besides our chairs and stand at attention for a good 5-6 minutes, which seemed like eternity. And then he'd go around amongst us and he'd say, "You raise your shoulder a little bit, lower your shoulder, turn your face this way, that way. You know, we had to stand like puppets. Yet he was Jewish. I mean, he could have been like Erich von Stroheim or something like that in a German army picture. We'd have the usual subjects, reading, geography, math. I was not a good student. I was passing grades. I missed a lot of school because of illness, also because I think it takes a certain type of aggressiveness to be a good learner, and I just wasn't. I was too shy.
Was the school near your home?
No. School was, I would say, almost an hour's trip from my home. I had to take the number 24 streetcar, change at City Hall Square for another one, and then I think there was a third one possibly. And the way I learned that is my parents hired a woman to accompany me and pick me up the first 3 or 4 weeks, and then I was on my own. But my sister went to school nearby too, so both of us traveled together very often.
So from what ages did you go to the Talmud Torah?
7 through age 11, 4 years.
And what languages did you learn in school?
It was all German and Hebrew, and in the 5th grade, I started English. That was compulsory. Under Hitler, everybody had to learn English from the 5th grade on.
Okay. I'd like to know a little bit more about Jewish life. Did you observe Shabbat?
Yes, very much so.
What was it like?
It was boring. We couldn't do anything, although I wouldn't say 100% because there was really nobody to supervise me. If I wanted to go someplace, I could take off and maybe meet a friend. I met a friend a few times in downtown, and we'd go to department stores and bought toys and things. But when I started getting lessons for my bar mitzvah, my father started me with the rabbi, then I was really very self-conscious about observing all the laws, because they criticized me when I had to walk to the rabbi's house for study, and they criticized me for carrying a handkerchief on me. You're not supposed to carry anything. And I said, well, how am I going to sneeze? You know, if I sneeze, I have to blow my nose. No excuse. Couldn't carry anything. So that was not necessarily a happy period. Although I belonged to Jewish organizations, and I can't remember, it was a Jewish athletic club, it was Bar Kochba. Bar Kochba was the name. That was like a Maccabi type club, athletics and so forth, and I'd go there, not too frequently. Again, distance. All my friends in school, had different lives, and I really lived in two worlds. When I lived in home, it was one thing, and then in school, it was altogether different.
Were your friends near your house mostly Gentile?
Yes.
What were they like?
Playmates. We would sometimes be invited at Christmas to see their Christmas tree, and I remember having 1 or 2 meals at somebody's house in the neighborhood, but that was really rare. There was one family, though, that I think was more friendly, and their name was Engel, E-N-G-E-L. We seemed to feel closer to them, but other than that, we really didn't have any close friends in our neighborhood. I did have one friend from school who lived not too far from us. His name was Harry Glücksmann, and his mother actually was my godmother, and he came from a fairly large family, and he was my age. There was another fellow named Kurt Gabel, G-A-B-E-L, and he and I would do some things together, and actually he immigrated to the States, and so he and I wrote a few letters to each other, but that was it. He lived in Los Angeles. Harry, on the other hand, he and I were much closer than that, and especially after we moved to Palestine, came to visit, stayed with us. I really didn't have that many close friends, so, that I grew up with. All the ones that we played with on the street, I'd be friends for the day, but then that was it, and I couldn't even tell you what their names were. I mean, we recognized some of the faces on some of the street pictures that I had that were taken.
Okay. What about your earliest memories of anti-Semitism? You spoke about it a little before. Tell me what you remember.
My earliest memories were of being called names and coming to my father crying, asking what they were doing, why they were doing that. And he said, "You won't give me answers like they're dumb and they don't know any better, and so forget it, kind of thing." But then, that was the earliest, I would say, being called. Two things they used to call us: EPA-Juden and Schacher-Juden. EPA-Juden, EPA was the name of a five and dime chain, so that meant you were cheap. Schacher-Juden Schachen is to bargain. In other words, Jews are always bargaining. They're always trying to get the better of you. So in other words, either way, you can't trust them. It's either cheap or they're bargainers. I would say that there was never any physical attacks at that time or anything like that, but all just name calling. The thing that's peculiar about growing up there at the time is that half of you starts to believe some of the stuff. I don't know if many people admit that, but when you grow up in a culture that surrounds you, in which everybody's saying the same thing, you wonder if it's not true. So you start to behave in a completely opposite way. In other words, and I think that some of the withdrawal that I experienced, aside from what was going on in my family, I think that didn't help it any to know that you were a despised minority, so to speak. So whenever people tell me now, as some people of German background say, Hitler was crazy, the whole country was crazy. And you could see it even then, beginning from on the street level, that the kids were picking this up somewhere. And for no good reason, really, starting to call you names. And then, of course, being in a Jewish school, you're a target. And right next door to us was a non-Jewish, or was a secular. I think some Jewish kids did go to the other school too. It was also a gymnasium. There was a wall in our school in the back, in a field like we had an exercise field or playground really, with a high wall all around it. The kids from the other school would climb on top of the wall, and while we were playing soccer or marching around, our gym teacher would have us, form ranks, and we'd practice marching around school. These kids would sit on top of the wall and yell things like Judah Verrecke. Now, Verrecke it's spelled Verecke. And what it means is die, but not ordinary die. It's like what you would call an animal, like croaking or something. It's not even strong enough. But that's what Jews die, soon. Because there was another part to it that rhymed. The whole thing was Judah Verrecke kurz um die Ecke, shortly around the corner. And these were like, I'd say, kids in their early teens. And then you see books. I'm getting ahead of my story a little bit. This actually, happened like in 33, 34. The moment Hitler came in, everything changed.
How old were you when Hitler came in?
I was 9 years old. And I can remember the election and listening to the radio. And and the moment he came in, of course, he had this purge, of all this supporters room and all those. And I can remember the announcer saying, overnight, party has been cleansed now, that all these people have been arrested and punished. didn't say that they'd been killed. But it was a feeling of, boy, this is really going to change things around, and at the same time being scared of what's happening. Because you see all this enthusiasm all around you, and people who are your friends one day, all of a sudden you see them in brown shirts. And then on April 1st, when that first boycott, nationwide boycott took place, my parents wouldn't let me go near the store. They kept my sister and me at home, and I didn't see them all day, but when they came back, they looked pretty beat, I think. They told me that the only nice person that came during this period during this day was the pastor from the church down the street, who said to my father, "Mr. Turner, it is a shame that my people are doing this to you today." And he came in through the back door, because you couldn't cross the fence.
What was the boycott?
Well, they sent SA troopers, Sturmabteilung, the ordinary brown shirts, scum, so to speak, at the bottom of the barrel, in their fancy uniforms with their leather straps and all that, standing in front of the store with big signs, "Germans don't buy from Jews," write things on, put big Stars of David on the windows, and on the showcase windows and so forth. And generally, let it be known that this is a Jewish store and you shouldn't buy there. And yelling slogans like that. But that only lasted one day, you see, and so that was over. But you grew up in an atmosphere of don't make waves. My parents once went to a movie and came back all upset. There was a Zionist movie showing pioneers in Israel and stuff. And they were upset because when they came out of the theater, there was a film crew shooting them, and then that was shown in newsreels later on. You see how the Jews gather together like rats, they have their own shows, their own entertainment, and they're not trying to be, they're different. The whole thing, that they're different. So the idea was to cause as little attention to yourself as possible. The one episode that I experienced, it wasn't really anti-Semitic, but it shows you what can happen. We had school on Sundays. In Germany, you went to school 6 days a week, and since we were religious-oriented school, we didn't go on Saturdays, so we had half a day school on Sunday. And my parents were planning to go on a little trip up the river, which was where we went to the beach, take a steamer up the river. And so I was coming back home on the streetcar, and I got out where I usually had to change in front of the city hall, and I found there was a parade, and the streetcar dropped me off right in the middle of it, so that on either side of the street that I had to cross, there were people lined up about 6 deep. And I was both horrified, because I knew I couldn't cross the street without somebody nabbing me and saying, "Hey, get out of the way," or something. I was really scared. And yet I was also curious to see what was going on. I was a very fancy person. It was some high Nazi official. It might have even been Hitler, I don't know, but there certainly was preceding it a tremendous parade with all kinds of marching bands and people dressed up in fancy uniforms with these shiny breastplates, copper and brass and everything, flags and everything. And I was scared to death. I wet my pants, actually, because I was afraid that I was going to get caught, being somewhere I shouldn't be, and also because my parents were probably scared to death of what was happening to me. I finally made it home, but they treated it sort of matter-of-factly, That's what you could expect. Then there were air raid drills. Could you believe it? In 1934 and 1935, we had air raid drills. he was preparing people. You know, this is all psychological. He was Hitler and his gang. They were preparing people for everything, and it's all glory. You know, it's glorious and wonderful. And you know, you catch some of that. I was reading these propaganda books. There was a novel called Hitler Junge Quecks. Quecks is like Quicksilver. You know, he was the hero of this young kid. Was the hero of the book. He became a Hitler Youth and informed on this one and that one and saved this country, so to speak. They made it into a movie too. And of course, it was all, and there was anti-Semitic stuff, but there was an adventure story. So that part of it, you know, you could relate to. My parents, they let us read all that stuff. They didn't say don't read it because you were exposed to it anyhow. So you might as well, you know. Besides, my parents were not psychologically sophisticated, I would say. But and then on the other hand, my father was a Zionist. He got the Jewish newspaper every week, you know, and showed us pictures of people in Israel planting trees and stuff. He says, how would you like to live there? That kind of thing.
Do you think he was thinking of moving already?
I think knowing my father, that he probably was, because he knew what it was to live in miserable circumstances and get out of them by your own wits somehow. That's how he got started in Germany. So he just left a bad situation, got into a better one, and that he would not have hesitated to pick himself up and go. But at the same time, make sure that all of us were taken care of too. He was not a selfish person. And
did you see any of the machinery of Nazism being constructed? Anything?
I did once. The kids and I on the street were sometimes a little adventurous, and we'd take little hikes into the country. And so one day, usually it was to go to places like see the big dump, you know, where all the trash went and everything. But this time we went a little farther, and we came upon a hill and looked down, and we saw this construction going on. And there were hundreds of workmen and buildings going up and things. And one of the kids, and I don't know how true this is, but he said to me, they're building a concentration camp. And let's get the hell out of here, you know, before we get caught. You know, every 9, 10-year-old, you know, you get scared like the haunted house or something.
About what year would that have been?
That probably was before 1934, 1933, probably. Even younger, maybe, 31.
And where in Hamburg would you have been?
Well, we were south of the city, so I know there was a concentration camp right near Hamburg, but I don't know if that's really where it was. I never looked it up. But in any case, whether it really was a concentration camp or not isn't the issue. The kids were aware of it, that there's something going on.
This was a term that was known.
A term that everybody knew. And there's an abbreviation, they call it KZ. They didn't say concentration. Yeah, you know, somebody was taken to the KZ last night, you know, or that was stuff you heard around, so everybody knew. That implied to the truth. So whenever anybody says we didn't know what was going on, they knew. They may not have known all the horrors that went on in extermination camps, I grant you that. But certainly people disappeared overnight, like we did.
Was it progressively difficult to observe your Jewishness? Was it harder to keep kosher, anything like that? Was it more difficult to actually practice Judaism?
Not to my knowledge. Not in 1935 when we left. Everything was still open and going.
Okay. I want to ask you if you can recount for us the process by which your parents decided to leave Germany, starting with what might have motivated them, the plans that they made.
Because part of the problem here in recounting this is that they kept my sister and myself in the dark because they were afraid that if we knew anything, we might inadvertently tell someone, and who knows where that would wind up, you know. So the actual first knowledge I had is that we were going was the day that we left. They woke us up and said, "You're not going to school today." And
What day was that?
it was November 13th, 1935. I couldn't believe it that we just were going to leave. So I started to take some things, my records. I wanted to take some of my music records. They said, "No, can't take anything." I didn't know then that they had already packed stuff of mine, my books and so forth, and sent it out ahead. I smashed the records up against the wall. I think it was sort of fun, throwing things up against the wall, breaking them, but I think I was furious. That's the way I expressed it. But later on, I, naturally found out what had happened, how this whole thing had come about. My parents belonged to a club called Ostjüdischer Verein. What it means is a club of Eastern Jews, people from Poland for the most part, who had settled in Hamburg. And every year they had a ball around Purim time. It was a Purim ball. And there was a lottery, a tombola, a Wheel of Fortune. Do they still call it tombola? I don't think that's a German. Anyhow, and my father won the prize. And knowing my father, I wouldn't put it past him that he put up a lot of money to win that prize. He says, "Oh, I'll buy up all the chances," or whatever. It was a trip to Palestine, a round trip to Palestine. He took the trip, and while he was there, he bought a bed and breakfast, 10-room bed and breakfast in a place called Beit Vegan, Beitwegan, means house and garden. Nowadays, it's called Bat Yam, and it's south of Jaffa, near Tel Aviv.
What year was this?
This was in 1934. He paid $15,000 American money, which he had smuggled out of the country, out of Germany. You couldn't take any money out, more than, let's say, 100 or 200 marks, because Hitler didn't want any money going out of the country. Balance of trade problem. Any case,
How did he smuggle the money?
I don't know. He just hid it somewhere. Paid $15,000 for it and had a house. Then, evidently, as he was getting ready to move us all out, he was collecting debts from people that owed money to him. He had been lending money to people, friends, Jewish friends. Whenever they were in need, they needed some money, he'd lend it to them, no questions asked. If he had the money, he was doing quite well, financially. And when he went to this one guy, the man said to him, "I don't have to pay you back because I found out that you smuggled money out of this country to buy a house in Palestine. And I can turn you over to the Gestapo." And my father said to my mother, "When one Jew says that to another, that's the time to go." And that's the story they told me. So I don't know how true that is, but I can believe it.
Okay. This is the interview with Siegfried Turner, tape 3, Mr. Turner.
Later on, as I look back on that period, I remember in our apartment that there would be people coming in and packing things in crates. And at the time, there was also a relative from Berlin who was visiting with us. And I think I was told that this was his stuff, that they were packing up, that he was emigrating to England. What I think really happened was that they were packing up our belongings in wooden crates and sending them on. I know they sent them on to the port of Jaffa. nearest city, or Haifa, or wherever there was a port. Because when we arrived in Palestine months and months later, it was all there, including a piano. And I never saw them create an upright black, shiny black piano. I never saw that leave the house. I don't know where the hell I was. I knew things were very different. My father sold the business. I knew that. He had sold apartment houses that he owned. And I was still going to school every day, coming home, but my father was home, and I couldn't understand. I knew that something was going on, but I didn't know what.
This is when?
This was just before we left, in the fall of 1935. I never said goodbye to anybody because I didn't know that we were leaving. You know, I knew something was happening. So when they woke me up that morning, I was 100% surprised, but not totally, if you know what I mean. You know, it just sort of something, now it clicks all of a sudden. My mother told me later that the night before, they had taken somebody's baby carriage and loaded it up with dishes to give to her friend, Mrs. Bernstein. Later on, they told me also that all their friends, their very close friends knew, Bernsteins knew. And Bernstein said to them, "Why are you running? Why are you running? It'll all change. This will not last. You know, this is a democracy, blah, blah, blah." Those people were all shipped off. The Bernsteins were, their relatives were stemless. Our chief rabbi in Hamburg, Karlebach, and half of his family wound up in Theresienstadt. He went to Riga, actually, Karlebach. He was an uncle of the singer, Karlebach. They all died, one way or another. I have the list. Hamburg sends out a register of all the victims from Hamburg and the dates on which the transports leaving Hamburg that they were on. They kept good records, you see. But that's how I found out, by not going to school that day. And we went to the train station, and the Bernsteins went with us. We said a tearful farewell, but my father wasn't there. I couldn't understand. I mean, you don't ask questions at a time like that. Too much is happening all at once, you know, and you just don't ask questions. Where's my father? We got on the train, and as soon as we crossed the Czech border, my father appeared in the train all of a sudden, walking down the aisle. I couldn't believe it, you know. What had happened was that he had taken a different train, an earlier train, and crossed the border and then got on this train to meet us because he didn't want to go on separate altogether. It looked too suspicious. This way was just a single man going on business somewhere, and a mother and two children going for a vacation in November. If they really weren't too tight yet on the controls, you know.
Did you need papers?
No, we didn't have any papers. Later on, we had the usual. My mother had a passport. My father had a German passport, and we had had some kind of permission to leave the country because nobody left anywhere without getting permission. And later on, in my mother's paper, I found a letter from a travel bureau that handled arrangements for the spas in Czechoslovakia, Marienbad and Karlsbad, and it was a letter confirming letters of credit that my father had arranged for before we left, that were being forwarded to a bank in Karlsbad, which is where we headed. That's all I found, you know, and wishing us a good rest, a good vacation, and nobody goes on vacation unless you're going skiing in the mountains or something in November. But they never caught on.
So you stayed in Karlsbad?
We stayed in Karlsbad for about 3 weeks in this hotel. Haus Helgoland. Helgoland is an island off the coast of northern Germany. It's a vacation resort, so it had some notions of vacation. And it was kind of, we didn't do anything. Go to the movies, go to the spa, drink the waters, nothing much.
Why did you stay for 3 weeks?
I have no idea why we stayed that long.
And where
I
did-
think my father was in the process of making some kind of arrangements at the time in Poland, with the Polish embassy, but I didn't know about that, to get us into Palestine on the Polish quota visa, because Britain, had mandate of Palestine, and they had quotas about how many Jews could immigrate from what countries. And this is where my parents used their fact that they were both born in Poland as to their advantage, to our advantage in being able to get into Palestine, because German Jews, knowing what was going on in Germany already, had flooded the British consulate, and there was a years-long waiting list. I mean, several years before you could even get your number to go to Palestine. So that's how they did it. From Karlsbad, we then went on to first to Auschwitz, to stay with my aunt and uncle and grandfather, their house. And I remember that quite well. I don't know if it was Hanukkah yet, but there was some kind of celebration, and the girls were dancing Polish mazurkas and polkas, and it was quite lively. But there again, I think I mentioned this before, the Polish kids, they would yell at us, Jews go to Palestine. But as I said, that was ironic because that's where we were headed. And by that time I knew where we were going. Of those people in Auschwitz, my grandfather, Jacob, the bagel baker, we brought him over to Palestine after we got there. And he died in Palestine many years after the War of Liberation, actually. He was over 100 years old. And my two cousins, Sala and Sabina, they survived the concentration camps and are now living in Williamsburg, New York, in Brooklyn. And my aunt and her husband died in a concentration camp. And I don't know who else. There would have been other family members there that I didn't know. They all died. Anyhow, we left Auschwitz and went to Krakow to stay with my rich uncle, Michael, who owned the shoe factories. And there were stories told about my father having sent him silver money, coins, that were valuable at the time, and that he buried them. Now, whether he buried them literally or spent them on a factory that was later taken over by the Nazis anyhow, I don't know. But in any case, my cousin, his son, went back after the war and dug up the whole backyard and couldn't find anything, so that may have been a myth. In any case, we stayed there in Poland, I think, for another few weeks. And they lived a very nice life there, let me tell you. They had maids. You ring a bell, you pull the bell rope, and they'd come and you'd order your eggs this way or that way, and the toast and so forth. They were quite well-to-do.
This is your father's brother's family?
Yeah, Michael and Mendel. And I remember going to see their factory where they made shoes, and the warehouses and the stores.
Was the British Embassy in Krakow?
I don't really know. Either there or Warsaw, but my father was busy running around, and all I know is that my father fixed things. And then we went on a train. And even on the train went to Hungary, Romania, and we wound up in Constanza, Romania. That's where we boarded the ship to go to Palestine. It was a Polish ship. And even on that train ride, the first part of it was just awful because we were all squished together in a compartment with crying babies and sick women and children, and it was just awful. And at one stop in Hungary, my father got out and he said, "Okay, come on with me." And we all, somehow he had bribed somebody, and we all went in the first class carriage, which was empty, all by ourselves. So he was always looking out for us somehow.
And when you got to Constanza, what was the name of the ship that you
The
took?
ship was the SS Gdynia, Gdynia. Yeah, that's Danzig in Polish. Anyhow, that was also kind of a crowded ship, and there was people slept on the deck because we were in the Mediterranean rather than the Black Sea. Partly was very exciting because you went through the Dardanelles and Istanbul and all that, and you saw some of the Greek islands. So it was sort of adventurous, and that brought us to Haifa.
And when did you arrive in Haifa?
I can't remember the exact date, but it was either December, the end of December, or January of 1936. But I think it was more like the end of December. So the whole trip really lasted from November 13th to, I'd say, the end of December.
And you arrived in Haifa, and what happened?
We were met by the only woman taxi driver in Israel, Palestine, who was an acquaintance of ours from Hamburg. Her name was Nellie Gabel, NellylYGAVEL. And Nellie was a really colorful figure, shall we say. She was very attractive. Jean Harlow type bleach blonde. And she had an old Plymouth, or a new Plymouth, I forget, but there was a Plymouth. I remember I'd never been in a Plymouth before. And she drove us down there. And she was a friend down there all the time we were there. She later, just to show you what kind of person she was, she came to the United States and lived in Hollywood, of course, and then right after the war, like in 45, she was in Europe with the occupying forces, doing translations and God knows what else, for the American Army. So she was always into adventurous things, kind of.
And did the family go to the B&B that your father had bought the year before?
We all went there, yeah. And the first thing my mother said, "Oh boy, if I got a lot of work to do here," because the thing was a building, one of these Art Deco concrete German Bauhaus-style buildings, sitting in the middle of a pile of sand, desert, So because you could get all the help you wanted, we hired a landscape architect, a German, who was digging ditches probably or pouring concrete somewhere, and he drew up designs, and we imported tons of earth from the camp, delivered by camel, with Arabs bringing the topsoil and scraped away and tried to build a little garden there, make a home. My mother put a lot of work into it. The worst thing that happened was that all the stuff that they had shipped from Germany, it stood in a uncovered, and the rains poured on it, and so all the book covers ran onto the sheets and pillowcases and linens that my mother had, packed and everything. So she was standing out in the blazing sun with a primitive little fire going over a wash basin, scrubbing, boiling laundry and scrubbing it, and so it all came out pretty clean though. But I still have some. I'll show you what happened to Sue. No, do you want me to show you? I have a set of prayer books that my mother had, one for each holiday. They were in green Morocco leather, and they were all moldy, and it's a shame. All from there. But anyhow, that's compared to what happened to people, you can't complain.
Was it adventurous for you?
Yeah, I remember that taxi ride through Jaffa, the Arabian Nights, all wonderful, colorful, smelly. See all the Arabs, the multiple wives walking ahead of them, and they're riding on the camel. donkey. It was kind of interesting, but not for long, because before you knew it, there was a general strike on the part of the Arabs, and I felt like I was right back where I was before, being persecuted, because they were shooting at us every night. And Hitler and Mussolini were supplying the arms for that. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was a great friend of the Axis.
So you were scared again?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember especially one night, there had been a sort of a truce for a while, and all the men in town went to Tel Aviv to get supplies and things for the stores and for business and everything. And that's the night they attacked, really fiercely. You know, that was tremendous. In the morning, part of it was kind of fun, you know, count the bullet holes, you hear the bullets whistle over your head. But it wasn't for us for long. My father said, I'm eating up all the money I saved, you know, what little money I had. Oh, I forgot to mention that they had also told me afterwards how they smuggled money out. They hired a professional smuggler who came to the house one night and asked my mother for a cutting board that she used to make pierogan on or whatever, and took $100 bills or whatever they were and wet them and then rolled them up the size of toothpicks on this cutting board and stuffed them into something that he smuggled across. For the privilege of doing this, he charged 1/3, which is really better than nothing, you know, than taking it all. At least he was honest and delivered it.
So
When we came up to this country, we had $5,000 left, which was pretty good. My father could start a business with that.
how was it that the family decided to move from Palestine to the United States?
Well, it was mostly because my father felt there was no future for us there at the time, and for him, and he tried to run a little store there, take it over, and he wasn't used to the kind of business that was there. It was, you know, it's a different culture, and stores are not run the same way that he was used to, and so it didn't work out. And then with all the you know, he had hoped that being located where we were, right near the beach, on a main street, that you could make a little living out of the hotel, but it turned out that we were mostly a haven for other refugees from Germany that we had known, mostly from Hamburg, and we were glad to put them up, but it wasn't bringing in any money. We were eating up what they had brought over.
So how did you come here?
Well, my father left in 1936. He came 10 months. He got a visa, again on the Polish quota, somehow, to come to as an immigrant to the United States. He had a brother in Boston, lived in Roxbury, and his name was Jacob Fish. There's a whole Fish family here at the time. And he sponsored my father. That is, you know, he promised that he would not become a public charge, he would be responsible for him. And got him a job, I think, working for Mr. Rabb, who owned Stop and Shop, the original Stop and Shop owner. My father was an egg candler by original trade. He'd buy the eggs, but he'd also know how to candle them. And in fact, I still have his little egg candle thing. To see how fresh they were. You could tell by the size of the air bubble inside the egg whether it was fresh or not. In any case, he got him a job here, and then my father worked for them for a while, and then also took a summer job in the Catskills in New York. And when we came over 10 months later, we went to stay with him in the Catskills.
When was that,
Woodridge,
Mr. Turner?
Woodridge, New York. That was in 1937. In August of 1937. We stayed there about 3 weeks and then moved to Boston. And we stayed for about 6 weeks with my uncle. And then my father rented an apartment and took over a store in Roxbury.
And what was it like living in Roxbury after all these other places you lived in?
Well, let me tell you, the first few days I went to school, there were some black kids spitting on us and yelling, calling us names, Jews, dirty Jews. I thought, geez, this is where I came in. But that was minor. That didn't last very long. The neighborhood was primarily Jewish, where we lived in Roxbury.
What was the address?
We lived at 206 Harold Street, Harold, in Roxbury, and the store was in the same building. The store was quite successful. We all worked in it. My sister and I worked in it after school. And my sister got scholarship to go to Simmons after high school, 4-year scholarship. I went to BU. I worked my way. From my first year on, I worked in a publishing after school, a publishing house after school. And I studied journalism. And then I worked on the BU News. I was associate editor, and I had that paper out of my tuition.
And where were you when the war was going on? Were you in high school?
I was in high school during the war, right? And I was an enemy alien, because my father became a citizen, and I was over 18 and under 21. Some technicality meant that I could not be included under his citizenship. So during the war, I was, being of German birth, I was considered an enemy alien, and I had a pink pamphlet with my picture in it. Couldn't travel outside the city of Boston. It seemed like an irony, really. Here you go through all this craziness, and then you're an enemy alien. And some people really took it the wrong way. I mean, when you had to go someplace and you go in, they had it stamped in the post office. I mean, literally, you could not go outside of Boston without getting permission. And some people paid attention to it, and some people didn't. Well, I never did. I never did want to take the chance of not having it. I mean, So some guys at the post office really Siegfried, huh? Okay, this kind of nasty look and nasty remarks. And actually, I had a choice. I didn't serve in this service because of my history of rheumatic fever. In fact, when I was 18, I was in the hospital with it. And a guy from Selective Service came to see me and asked me if I wanted to be drafted, if I wanted to be eligible for the draft. I says, what happens if I say no? He says, you can never become a citizen. So I said, okay, I'll be eligible for the draft, So then they screened me out anyhow because I had this illness. And I became a citizen in 1945, right after I became 21. My papers came through.
What was it like hearing about the war from Boston, knowing that you had family in Europe?
We were just helpless, I mean, my parents corresponded with relatives in Poland, and then, of course, there was no way to. And we knew that terrible things were happening, but there was nothing we could do. The only good thing in the whole period was the fact that we had brought my grandfather over to Palestine. In fact, he remarried when he was well past 80 and was in a nursing home, so apparently his last days were okay. But my aunt and uncle, and both aunts and uncles. Right after the war, of course, as soon as we heard anything, we started getting reports, and we started looking for them. So my father brought over quite a few people.
How did he look for them?
I think he got in touch with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and the Immigrant Mutual Aid Society, both of which are connected somehow with the organizations in Europe that were registering all the survivors. so that once we found out who was still around, who was still alive, then we started corresponding with them directly, and my father went to bat for them with the government in terms of promising that, you know, he'd be responsible for them. So he brought over 2 or 3 of my first cousins, one of whom is still alive here in Boston, and her husband. Of course, the stories they told us were just unbelievable. One of my cousins spent the war, they escaped from a concentration camp by digging a tunnel. And then they fled to Hungary, where they passed themselves off as Catholics during the war. And the men even had foreskins grafted onto their penises, because that's the first thing the Nazis asked you to do, to identify yourselves, pull down your pants. And they went around parading around with banners, you know. I couldn't believe these stories. My cousin from Krakow, Siegmund Turner, he was married in the ghetto in Krakow. When the Nazis put all the Jews in the ghetto, he was married there. And then he and his wife were both placed in separate concentration camps after they broke up the Krakow ghetto. And they miraculously found each other after the war. They both survived, because they were fairly young, so they were useful in terms of working, and they could survive. But my cousin Siegmund watched his father literally die in his arms, because his father would refuse to eat what little they had because it was Passover. That, to me, you know, I mean, even religiously, that is not correct, because life comes before anything else, and he did not save his own life. Who knows how rational he was at that point.
What camp was that?
I don't know. My other cousin could probably remember that, the one that still survives here in Boston.
Okay. This is the interview with Siegmund Turner. It's tape number 4. Mr. Turner, we've been talking about your life in the United States and the war years, but I wanted to go back for a minute. I meant to ask you about the Nuremberg laws. You were still in Germany when the Nuremberg laws were promulgated, and I'm wondering if you remember anything about them or were affected by them in any direct way.
Yes, I sure was. I don't remember the actual laws being passed. What I do remember is that all of a sudden, Ernie, the governess, had to leave. We were told that her father needed her on the dairy farm. And that seemed reasonable enough, but my sister and I were absolutely heartbroken. And it may not have been connected at all with what happened, but later on, because it seems like there was about a year's gap between that and my first becoming aware of the fact that we could not hire anybody under the age of 45 to take care of us or to live with us or to be a household help. And the reason that we were told was that it had to do with Misch-Ehe or Mischlinge, that means mixture of either marriage mixtures between races or just being mixed up, with Germans sexually or any other way. So I was told, so my parents, when they hired the next governess after Ernie left, which was an extremely painful thing, and I thought it had to do with the fact that she was too young to be working for us, according to the law, but I'm not sure that maybe her father really did need her, but she certainly become a part of our family. And they hired people that were much older, much not nicer, and one of them was really kind of a low life, I would say. She was gross in a sense. My father got rid of her very quickly. She was vulgar and so forth. So, but in that way, I do remember that the laws, suddenly became so strict that we couldn't even hire who we wanted to hire to work for us in the house. There's the reason for that being that Hitler, there's another part of propaganda that every German girl that worked for a Jew was going to get impregnated by the boss. That was the myth.
Any other restrictions that you remember?
Not really. I mean, there were enough restrictions already in terms of just be cautious, behave, don't do anything. In 1935 was not as bad as it got, afterwards.
I also wanted to ask whether you personally remember listening to Hitler on the radio.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, everybody. I mean, you could hear it. I tell you, we had our own way of dealing with things. Like when they renamed City Hall Square, which was always called Rathausplatz, they called it Adolf Hitler Platz. And every time we went in the streetcar conductor would yell out, Adolf Hitler Platz. All the Jews would say, Amen, because Platz means burst, too, explode. So that's our little jokes.
What about Voice of America or any English broadcast?
No.
Couldn't hear that.
No. My father used to listen to shortwave a lot, but I don't remember.
Okay.
I know he did. We had a shortwave radio.
Okay. We're back in the United States, and you're living in Roxbury, Boston, and you went to Boston University, and what happened from there? What became your occupation?
Well, I worked all during the school time I was in school in a theatrical printing publishing house, really, and I worked there while I was going to school. Actually, while I was in school, I had a field placement in a newspaper, a fairly good-sized newspaper in the environment, neighborhood of Boston. And I decided then and there that I really did not want to continue a career in journalism as such, because I was asked to do some things that went against my grain, like interviewing the mother who had just been notified that her son had been killed in the war. And, I just felt that was inhumane, and I stuck with the job in journalism in the publishing house and for a while longer, but then I decided that wasn't really a future for me. And one of my distant cousins here, who also came from my father's hometown, Nathan Rosenberg, by name, he said to me, he says, why don't you go into social work like your cousin Eddie? And Eddie Fish had been a social worker. In fact, he and my ex-brother-in-law and I all graduated in 1947 from BU. We have a picture of the three of us in their caps and gowns. He got his degree, master's degree in social work, and I went into social work. I went on my lunch hour. I went to my lunch hour to find out about courses, and I signed up by the end of the interview. And I've never regretted it. I spent 40 years as a social worker. My last position from which I retired was as a clinical director in the mental health clinic in a old Boston family agency. And that was interesting. I did some pioneering work in the field of child abuse, prevention.
Okay. And your family?
I have a wife. I married rather late, I must say in 1960. I was almost 35. I was 35 years old. And we have 2 children. My wife's also a social worker. I met her in the Boston Family Service where I started my first job out of graduate school. We have 2 children. One is 34, going to be 34 in May, in August, and the other one is just turned 29. They're both in computer fields. The older one is married and has a baby who's about a year and a half old. The younger one is going to be married in September 1st this year. And they're both computer geniuses, and I don't understand what they do, but God, they've made more money than I ever did, I'll tell you.
Mr. Turner, did you ever return to Hamburg?
Yes, I returned on the basis of what the city of Hamburg calls an invitational visit. They invite people who were former residents or citizens of Hamburg for a 1-week visit, all expenses paid, and plus a companion. And we did that 2 years ago. And I must say, it was a marvelous experience, with all the mixed feelings you can have. I've never felt really at home anyplace else, and even though the city has changed so much, I can't say I never felt at home. I do feel at home here, but it's not the same as where you grew up. The city has changed so completely, I couldn't even recognize where I was born, where we lived. There's nothing there. It's all different. It's not so nice, but the rest of the city is gorgeous. It's a beautiful city. And they treated us royally, really. They had all kinds of events planned for us. And I met some wonderful Germans who had taken great care in preserving what little there is left of Jewish life in Hamburg, and documenting the past, which is very rich and very long. I mean, it goes back to the 1600s when Portuguese Jews settled in Hamburg first. And the richness of the life and the importance that several Jewish families attained there. Just an example, the Warburgs, the financiers, come from Hamburg. Albert Ballin founded the Hamburg America line, where most of the immigrants came over on, and he was a Hamburger Jew. So, I mean, there's a very, and culturally, it's a marvelous city. Opera and ballet and symphony, all kinds of things going on all the time. They took us to the opera. But whenever anybody says, and this may be my greatest concern, is that whenever anybody says there were only a few crazy people that were doing all these things in Germany, it's not true. The whole country was with it against the Jews. I mean, that wasn't the only thing that they were all united on, but it certainly was one of them. I don't believe anybody who says that there were only a few bad Nazis that did all those things. They were supported by the whole country, and everybody shut their eyes to what the rest were doing, and they knew things were going on. I mean, just my example, we left a house full of furniture. We didn't sell any furniture. It was left there like we were going on vacation. Maybe the piano was removed, but what happened to that? They had an auction. Some Nazis bought it up, took the apartment, and that happened to everybody. And all the works of art that people stole and everything. I just heard that there's going to be an auction at Christie's soon of Austrian Jewish art objects that have been in storage for years that were taken from Jews, from Austrian Jews. What are they going to do with the money? They're going to pay for reparations. Finally, they're getting around to paying for reparations. That's what I heard.
When you think back on your parents and what they did, leaving Germany in 1935, what do you think about them, what it took for them to do that, and all of that? What do you think now, all these years later? How do you think of it?
Well, from my, growing up as I did and watching my kids grow up and so forth, I imagine that to my kids, for instance, it would seem unbelievable that anybody could sort of do this. Yet they're very mobile. They'll root themselves up from one city to another. But they're still in the same country. It's just changing the scenery a little. I don't know. To them, to my parents, it didn't seem like any... They were proud of what they did. But it didn't seem that unusual. And to myself, I never felt, what I did or what I lived through was that unusual. A lot of people did, and I should be lucky that I was so escaped so easily. And as I said, whether it was you or Rebecca when I spoke with her, that I don't even know if I belong in this project because I didn't live in a concentration camp. And yet, when I look back, I've had a lot of psychological problems that I've tried to get help with over the years. And I'm wondering how much of it, none of the people I ever saw for help really related my earlier experiences in being uprooted and having to leave everything behind as having any role to play. It was always internal stuff, I'm sure that it left a scar on me. I don't know, my parents, as I think about them, to them it seemed like the best thing to do, and you did it, no questions. If it was going to work out, it was going to work out. If it didn't, what could you lose, kind of. And there was an optimism about them, and I think they were conditioned with that. Because like my father, he uprooted himself from one bad situation and made life better for himself. My mother did the same thing, even smuggling bread. You had to survive somehow. For a long time, I carried my passport with me, my American passport with me all the time. I said, you never know when things are going to happen. I know where it is right now. I can put my finger on it right now if I have to. But I think I'd be prepared to do the same thing. There's other people, they just can't believe things could go so bad. And then when I hear about the militia in this country and stuff like that going on, I really get scared.
Your parents, when and where did they die?
My father died, they had sold their building in Roxbury and moved to Newton in 1957. And within 1 year of my father's retirement, he was dead with cancer. He had never really been sick in his life. Just, he didn't know how to retire, I think. He was always on his feet, always working, always. And yet he tried to do some part-time work. My mother died in 1983. She lived to be 86. She died in the jail for that cancer.
Did they talk about Germany a lot?
No, occasionally. I don't think they looked back too much. My mother used to, in the beginning, it was hard, because there was something about German quality of merchandise and stuff, You can't beat it, in a sense. At least then you can, I still have sheets and pillowcases from Germany that's at least 60, 70 years old. Can't wear them out. And they're good, materials. And so she used to compare, But then again, it's hard to make changes, so you always think what you have is better than what you're going to get.
Is there anything finally that you wanted to say to people who watch the tape, or to your children who might listen to it?
I think I've said pretty much what I wanted to say in terms of where the fault was, that I think it was shared by all the people that supported Hitler in Germany, and that was pretty much 100%. Whether it was out of fear, out of, that if they thought anything different, they would also be shipped away. I don't know. The fact is that nobody really fought them inside. And so that's my parting shot of my legacy, I think. Don't believe it.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What is Sister's last name?
And her last name is Saunders. That's her married name.
S-A-U-N-D-E-R?
Yeah, Helen Turner Saunders.
Okay, this is the interview.
Who's talking? Oh, that's the guys out there.
This is the interview with Siegfried Turner, and we're going to look at some photographs and documents.
The picture shows my father in uniform. During the First World War, he was he was in the Austrian army. I'd say the picture was taken somewhere before 1917.
Okay, I'm just going to take a couple of different views of this. You don't have to say anything more.
The bottom one was taken 1918.
Go as close as I can. Describe it.
The next two pictures show my father and his store in Hamburg, number 9 Brachdamm in Hamburg. First picture was taken approximately 1924 or 5, shortly after he and my mother married. And the second picture, the one below it, next to it, is taken, I would say, in the 1930s, probably 1934, and shows my father, Lotte Goucher, daughter of a friend, my sister Helen, and myself. And that was taken when I was probably about 10 years old.
You have a little boy on the left.
Little boy on the left.
I just wanted to that detail.
Are you still taping?
Yes, I am.
Actually, the first picture is probably taken after 1928 because it already says J. Turner, and my father changed his name from Isaac to Julius in 1928.
Detail.
You want a translation of the big sign? It says eggs, butter, and cheese. Eier, Butter, and Käse. Although he carried many other things.
And he was a fair man with the weights, eh?
Yeah. Always give you an extra slice. This is a picture of kindergarten celebration of Christmas, where my sister and I were enrolled. It was not obviously not a Jewish kindergarten. I think we may have been the only Jewish children there. We are the second and third from the right in the middle, on the middle table. It's my sister, and I'm the third person. Right. We used to hang our stockings up just like all the other children, waiting for Santa Claus. This is a class photo of my first grade class at the Talmud Torah Schule, and the teacher in the last row is Herr Hertz, which I forgot his first name, but anyhow, unfortunately, my face is not visible because two boys in front of me decided at the last second to sort of cock their heads together. I'm in the back row, standing behind the fifth and sixth boys from the left. You can just barely make out my nose. The boy standing right in front of me with his hands in his pockets is Manfred Bundheim, and he lives in Israel, and his name is Joseph Ben Brit. And the boy standing right in the middle, wearing a dark jersey with a strap going across his chest, and his head is sort of cocked up in the air, that's Harry Glucksmann, who was a close friend, who visited us in Israel Palestine after we went there.
So you're behind
I'm
this
between
fella?
you two, yeah, right there.
Okay. And this is your friend?
Yeah.
This fellow? Okay.
Yeah.
What was my sister's last name again?
Bundheim, Bundheim. I don't really recognize anybody, remember anybody else. The straps, I should explain, the straps that we had in those bags around our shoulders, that's for your lunch. No cafeteria. Everybody brought their own. And you never let go of it. That's the gymnasium in back of us. It's still there, the gym, where we exercise. We have rope climbing and stuff like that. I think this guy's Coach me. Anyhow. This is a picture taken by a street photographer who used to come down periodically and take pictures of the kids playing on Brackdam. It's taken right on Brackdam, and on the very upper left edge of the picture you can see my father's store sign. On this particular picture, I'm not on this picture, my sister is. She is in the front row, fourth from the left. That's Helen. I would say this picture was taken when she was about 6 years old, I would say 5 or 6 years old. Around 1929, 1930. This street is totally destroyed. No, it's been rebuilt. I was normal. I wasn't. Anyhow, that's a picture of me playing my violin. The picture was taken by my violin teacher. I was just about 11 years old at that time.
So this is what year?
This would be 1934, 35. I remember Yehudi Menuhin had just made his debut with the San Francisco Symphony, and my teachers held him up as a model for me to emulate. That's a picture of my family, my mother, my father, my sister, and myself, taken, I think, during the Jewish holidays in 1935. We had all just come from services, and my father decided that we should stop in a photographer's studio and have our picture taken. It's customary for grown-ups to wear formal clothes for the Jewish high holidays in Germany. That's why my father's wearing his tuxedo. My mother's wearing an evening gown. Probably the last picture we took in Germany. This is a picture of a family outing with friends to Blankenese, which is a suburb of Hamburg on the river Elbe. We had to take a boat to get there. On the picture, in the group in the lower left corner is my mother with my sister in her sort of lap. That's Mrs. Bernstein, who was my mother's closest friend, and me in front of her sitting sort of cradled by Mr. Bernstein. His name was Nathan, and I think her name was Luba Bernstein. They both died. They were both sent to concentration camps after they were sent in a transport to Theresienstadt. Terezin. My father is the last person in the on the in that row, last person from the left. Behind them and sprawled out sort of in the sand and beach chairs, relatives of the Bernsteins. Their name was Stemmler, Stammler, and I think they were also killed in concentration camps. It was a typical Sunday outing. You take the steamer, get off at the beach, spend the day, a few hours at the beach. Nobody got terribly undressed, as you can see. We were all wearing decent clothes, because right after this we'd go to a nice restaurant and have dessert, strawberries and whipped cream and stuff.
About what year was that?
That would have been about 1930, 31. So I look smaller. We didn't have cars, so every place we went, we had to take the subway or a taxi to get us someplace.
Turner, we're on tape 6. 5, I'm sorry, we're on tape 5, and we're looking at photographs and documents.
Okay, Mr. Prince.
This is a picture taken at a wedding in Dynow, Poland, Dynow, which my father attended. He is the fourth person from the right, wearing the unusual skull cap. That's what they usually wore in Hamburg. But I don't know whose wedding it was, but it must have been somebody in the family, because he wouldn't have gone otherwise. Anyhow, it's an interesting souvenir of the times gone by, and probably most of those people perished in the Holocaust. This shows my uncle in Auschwitz in the process of supervising the building of his new house, which was, as I remember it, quite modest, actually. He was a painter by trade, a house painter. I don't know who the other people are in the picture, probably his children. I don't know how many he had. I know two. He had two girls.
When would that have been?
This would have been, I would say, in the late 20s, early 30s maybe.
Is that the only picture you have of Auschwitz?
That's the only picture I have of Auschwitz, of their house. Guess when we went to visit there, we didn't bother taking pictures so much. There wasn't that much to see. It was a very modest little town. This is my mother on board the SS Gdynia as we were sailing from Constanza, Romania to Haifa. She is wearing one of her favorite coats that had an ermine collar on it. I remember that quite well. It was a very crowded ship, unlike the picture here, because a lot of people were fleeing from somewhere to somewhere. I remember being very crowded and uncomfortable for that reason.
Sir, can you say that again and take your arms down because you're covering your mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. Just, if you could just summarize that again one more time.
Okay. This is my mother on board the SS Gdynia as we were crossing from Romania to Palestine. She's wearing my one of her favorite coats. It had an ermine collar. I remember it quite well. Unlike the picture, though, the ship was quite crowded with people. A lot of people fleeing from one thing or another. The picture on the left is my father, Marsha Fish, and Naphtali Fish, who are his niece and nephew. Naphtali is the son of Jacob Fish from Boston, who had emigrated to Palestine in 1932 or 3. This picture was taken in 1934 when my father made his first visit to Palestine on the basis of the trip that he had won in the lottery. The picture of the building is the building that he bought while he was there in 1934. The sign says Malon, which is Hebrew for hotel. It's the front of the building. The picture underneath that is my grandfather, Jacob Schoen, was taken in 1945 in Palestine. And he was well into his 80s, probably more than that, close to 90. Quite a traveler. Going back and forth, Denmark, Poland.
Okay. And go.
This is my father's passport, and it shows his various travels from one place to another. It expired in March of 1938, so he must have gotten it just in 1933, which is when he did get it, in 22nd of March. And interestingly enough, even though it goes on farther into really later on trips and so forth, this is the only place where a swastika stamp appears.
and it is dated the 13th of November 1935, and it is emigration. It says Ausreise means exit, trip, really. As he crossed over. It's not in an actual chronological order, because later on you have trips from 1934, but this is, on this particular page, they checked him out as leaving Germany.
Should I try to get a close-up on
On that one?
swastika?
Yeah.
Maybe we can
See if
just
I can-
hold it open in front of
Yes.
us. Yeah, that's good, thank you. Just hold it right there. So, please. Okay. Thank you.
This is one of my last, I think it was my last report card. It was dated April, no, I guess April 1935. And it shows that I was at best a mediocre student, although my conduct and my attention and orderliness was good, and my punctuality was excellent. Although I missed 8 days of school, probably due to illness. Also shows me being promoted to grade 5. The teacher's name is Mr. Goldschmidt.
How do you spell Goldschmidt?
Goldschmidt. Goldsmith, in English. And the principal's name was Arthur Speer, and he tangled actively with the Nazis. I read it later on. And when they took over the school or something, 39 or 40 or 41, they kicked him down the stairs. You know, he was injured, but he eventually wound up in New York. So I used to think it was official, but it isn't. It's from a travel.
Yeah, but it's interesting.
This is a letter from a travel bureau that specialized in, represented the spas of Czechoslovakia, Karlsbad, Marienbad, and the other ones listed. My father had evidently made arrangements with them to transmit some monies via a letter of credit once we had left Germany, and so it is dated 3 days after we had left. We had already arrived in Karlsbad because we are, according to the letter, we are staying in the Haus Helgoland in Karlsbad, and it shows amounts of marks, 3,000, 6,000, 7,900 marks being transmitted via letters of credit, and wishes us a good cure and a good rest, recovery, and all good wishes. And I thought it was kind of ironic because the last thing we had left for a reason for it was going on vacation. That was the least of it. love how they addressed my father. Hochwohlgeboren. You know what that means? Highly well born.
Dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's dinner.
Yeah. Well, anybody that pays the money, you see, automatically gets that title.
Well, that was their classification.
Yeah.
Those are different colors.
So that's... And I was never in Carlsbad until we left. She had gone there before, so... This is a porcelain Seder plate that my mother had bought when she and my sister went to Carlsbad in 1933. The interesting thing about this plate is that years later I discovered through a friend who is a Jewish antiquities specialist that this was on exhibit at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem as an object, an everyday object made into for ritual purposes. This is originally designed as an oyster platter that the factory had decided to convert to a Seder plate for special occasions, I guess, for special people. So it's apparently quite interesting relic. Did I say what year?
Yes.
Okay. This is myself on board the SS Conte di Savoia, Italian line ship, crossing from Naples to the United States in August of 1937. I managed to enjoy some of the amenities on the ship, such as a swimming pool, which to this day is my favorite sport, swimming.